Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Writers Chat Tuesday. That's what I keep seeming to say every time we come on. This is where Craft Connects Community. We are a Christian-based writing group that loves to talk about writing, craft, and faith a lot of the time. And today's show is Mining for Inspiration. And we have a special guest with us. But before I turn it over to Norma, who's going to introduce her, I'm going to say, thank you for watching our replay. If you would like to be here live, please come join us. You can do that. Join our Facebook group called Writers Chat Members. Answer the questions. We'll let you in and you can be here live so you can participate, take part in the after party, and all the fun stuff. So without further ado, Norma, will you please introduce our special guest today?
It is my privilege and my honor to introduce Heather Norman Smith as our speaker today. She's going to talk to us about mining for inspiration, using your passion, purpose, and past to create compelling subplots and build characterization. Let me tell you a little bit about Heather. Excuse me, she loves sharing the redemptive love of God through story. She is the author of 6 Christian fiction books, all set in her home state of North Carolina, mine too, by the way. Her latest novel won a Selah Award, a Golden Scroll Award for Contemporary Novel of the Year. She is the mother of 4 kids, ages 9 to 19, and in addition to spending time with family, writing, and speaking, she enjoys singing about Jesus, and she has a beautiful voice. Heather, take it away.
Thank you for that introduction. I am so happy to be here with all of you, and I think we're going to have a great conversation this morning. So, like you said, I write fiction primarily, and I find that in the novels that I've written, there are always autobiographical elements. Of course, we write what we know. But I've been thinking lately about how we can be more intentional about that to make our stories better. And to help us in our writing. So, how can we mine for inspiration from our own lives? So, we don't want it, of course, to be completely autobiographical. Thankfully, my life is not that interesting as some of my characters and the things they go through. But I think we can take things we can borrow from our experiences in order to build into fiction. So, we're going to talk about that a little bit. So, I want to tell you the what, the why, and the how of that this morning. So the what, like you've already said, we can use our passion, our purpose, and our past as we're brainstorming for a great story. Now, I said in setting this up that it was mainly for subplot and for characterization because those things are a little bit easier, I think, when we're talking about this inspiration piece than the whole big picture. The whole big picture usually, from in my experience, has the story was just there. Like I didn't sit down and brainstorm the main idea. It was just something that I had to get out, and it just seemed to be there. But there's these elements that maybe I've got to think a little bit more about in order to put together a bigger story. Right. So that's why we're focused a little bit more on subplots and characterization. Subplots really build your story overall, in my opinion. Okay. So the what then is passion, purpose, and past. Passion, something you feel strongly about, obviously, something that you are very knowledgeable about. So I just encourage writers to think about those things. What are your passions? What drives you? And for me, I can look back over the novels that I've written and see where those things were so evident in my writing. One of those, and Norma, I know you share this with me, one of those is foster care and adoption. So that's something I'm very passionate about, something I have lived. So it's part of my experience too. But I can use that. I can use my writing as a platform for my passion, right? So my first novel was kind of born out of that exploration of this passion in my life, for foster care and adoption. And that's really what started all the writing, was that I needed to tell a story. I needed to tell a story about a child in foster care. And that set me on this journey. So another passion of mine personally, like you said, is singing. I love to sing. And so I found that in my next to last novel, having a character who also had a love for singing helped me to write an authentic story, because not just from knowledge or technical things, that does help, but just the passion that my character and I shared, even though she was my character and she's fiction. But that I was able to use those things. Another thing is my home state. I love showcasing North Carolina in my writing. That's something I love my home state. So I can use that love to help drive a story. Okay. That's passion.
Heather, what were the names of the book? What's the title of the book that you wrote about foster and adoption?
Several of them have elements of adoption. The first story, though, and it was by most standards a novella, it's called Grace and Lavender. Love the story, not my best writing, I gotta say. That first one, I had a lot to learn, okay, from that first one. But then I really dove in and started studying the craft a lot more after that one. But Grace and Lavender, the child was a 13-year-old girl in foster care named Grace. It's where that started.
That's a great book. And the one where your character sings?
That one is called Songs for a Sunday. Okay. And, all of my books, like we've said, are set in North Carolina. Most are in fictional towns, but 2 were in real places. And so that one in particular is set in Winston-Salem. I live right outside Winston-Salem. And so I got to use my passion for my where I live to also drive that story, because it was very much based on real places, real landmarks, and that was a lot of fun to do. So the most recent book, A Simple Kindness in Flatsboro, is in a fictional town, but it's based on the town that I live in now, where I've been for a long time. So that was fun as well, to be able to pull some elements in from where I live. So passion and purpose kind of overlap a little bit. Sometimes our purpose is our passion and vice versa. But I want writers to think about when they're looking for elements to incorporate into a story, purpose can be a little different. It's, what do you feel like you were put on this earth to do? And again, naturally, that's going to come out in a story. But when we are intentional about thinking about our purpose, I do think it motivates us as we are crafting a fiction piece. So the 2 that come to mind for me, and that I think I hope are evident in my writing, as far as purpose is, our purpose is to tell people about Jesus. So that's something that's very important in fiction. And also, my purpose is to be a mom. So I'm going to use those things in my writing. I think that's a lot of you guys can share. You share that with me, that your purpose is evident in your writing and it helps drive your writing. Okay, talking about our past, and I love acronyms because it does help me remember when I'm trying to brainstorm. I think our past is super important. We are our collective experiences, and it's not always been intentional. Sometimes when you're writing, it just comes out. But maybe we can be intentional in looking for subplots, looking for characterization in our past. So unfortunately, I think what tends to be the most effective is painful experiences, because we feel those so deeply. And it can be very cathartic too when you incorporate your past pain into fiction. So um, it doesn't have to be painful. Obviously, you can think of happy things. Maybe it's a trip that you took. You went somewhere and it was a memorable, wonderful experience. Maybe you want your character to share that because you've got firsthand knowledge of this place, and that can be really authentic and detailed. You can use that as something your character has experienced, or just build a subplot around a trip that you took. Um, but obviously, those memorable experiences from our past, like a painful breakup, you pour that emotion into a character, and your readers are going to feel that, So, and that's one way I think we can write authentically, is to mine inspiration from our past experiences with intention. Okay, so why do we do this? I've already spoken a little bit about the benefits that I think come from using our own life to pull elements into a story. But I think the number one reason for me personally to do it this way is motivation. Motivation to keep writing when you hit that wall, when you hit that dead zone in a story, especially when it comes to purpose, because I have to remember my purpose in writing. I am not just writing a story. I am not just using this as a creative outlet for myself. If my purpose is to tell people about Jesus, then I am motivated to continue and to finish that story, even in those times where it gets really difficult and I might want to give up and say, why am I doing this? So if we're intentional in that thinking, I think it does help us to stay motivated to complete a story, to finish writing it. But also, like I've mentioned, it's the authenticity. They say write what you know, and that's a big part of it, is to have those elements of things that you are so closely connected with in your own life that your readers feel the genuineness in your story. And just the knowledge component too. Those, I can research and research and research, and I try to do that to build detail into a story. But if it's something that I've lived, then I don't have to do quite as much of the research, and I can use that to create a story that when readers are involved in it, they have this sense of authenticity and that it's genuine. So that's, to me, that's the why, or the main reasons why.
Heather, when you get bogged down in the middle, or that part that you just can't put together or push through, what are some of the things that you do to help you either remember the why, or what are some of the steps you take to kind of push through that doldrum, or whatever you want to call it, in the
Yeah.
middle?
I think most writers will say that there is a lot of rereading involved, and so I have to start over so many times when I'm bogged down. And if a story takes a long time too, I might not be the same person that I was when I started writing the story. I've gone through other things, and it's going to affect the outcome. It's going to affect how I look at this story and how I want to tell it. So I think when you get stuck, it's often a process of sometimes going back to the very beginning, um, rereading. You can even read it out of order. So go back to the beginning, read through to where you are at that point. read it as random chapters, to get a feel for that place and time in your story. And that kind of helps you reset a lot to get over. And maybe it helps me realize I want to take this in a different direction. And there's sometimes lots and lots of rewriting that has to happen. So I'm actually very hopeful that this conversation is going to help me in a lot of ways, because I've been in a really dry season for quite a while with writing. I think part of it is just a season of life that I'm in. And I was surprised when I was writing all the time and it was just pouring out and then it just stopped. And so I've had a manuscript on my computer for a few years now, which is about at 30,000 words. And it's over the last several years, it's been a different 30,000 words. I've rewritten those 30,000 several times. And now I think I'm at a point where I want to start back, and I'm going to use some of these on things. It's when I was thinking about this topic of inspiration, I was kind of getting excited. Like I can use what I'm talking about and go back and be more intentional in some of these things in this story. And maybe that'll help me get those creative juices flowing again and push through to hopefully finish it. But we do go through seasons, and I'm learning to be okay with that, right? It doesn't mean that we're done forever. It's just a season. So that was a great question. And I'm hopeful that I can push through with this one and finish it and maybe use some of these things.
And do you find when we're in times like this, where for whatever reason those creative juices aren't flowing, that it's easy to get down on ourselves, when really we should be looking at, perhaps this is a season, like you said, that God has pulled us away. Yeah. I often will remind people of the what is it? The 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down. And people just buzz right over that. But sometimes he makes us pause something. We may not be able to see why, but sometimes later we can look back, and we need to give ourselves some grace, I think. Do you find that true?
I'm learning that. It hasn't always been the case. I tend to be pretty hard on myself, I've been told that I don't know how to relax, and that, if I'm not doing something, I don't feel like have as much value, right? So I am trying to learn how to rest. And in the vein of what we're talking about here, like I said, I'm not going to be the same person by the time I pick the story back up, right? And maybe that period where God said, this is not for you right now, maybe it's because I'm going to go through some things that I can use later on. So if I had pushed through and tried to do it now, maybe it's not the story that I was supposed to tell. So that's a really great point, and I am trying very hard to embrace that as a season, and as it's not a failure. It doesn't have to be negative, because that's the way it felt for a long time. It's like I'm not producing work at the moment, but we know that God's timing is not our timing, and that I'm not producing words in a manuscript, but I am living life in a way that will affect that manuscript later. So hopeful for that. And, you've encouraged me to think of it more that way, that hopefully I'll see that later. It's like, yeah, if I told this story before, it wouldn't be the story I was supposed to tell. So I'm excited to see what it comes up.
And it may not have the same impact based on whatever it is you're going through now. And I think as writers, we all tend to have that same mindset of, if we're not writing and producing and doing, then the imposter syndrome tends to set in big time, right? Right.
Yeah.
And that's the enemy. And we just have to, I've even heard the big names, the big authors that we love, whether from Blue Ridge or just out in the wild, as they say, that
Mhm.
have talked on the same thing, that there's been seasons in their lives where they couldn't write, and they
Right.
just didn't mean things were percolating back here in the back in the subconscious, but we just have to trust God and his timing, and it's hard. It is very, very hard.
Imposter syndrome is a difficult thing. Um, so even going to the conference that you and I were just both at, and I was a finalist for this award, and I was so excited to be there for the award ceremony, and but knowing that I had not written anything in quite some time, because the publishing process takes so long. So the book came out in September of 25, but I wrote it a long time ago, right? And so I'm very proud of that book and excited about being a finalist for that award. But even just being there felt a little bit like imposter syndrome. And then knowing that I was coming here today felt, I had that. It was pretty real. But it's been fun to kind of, like I said, dive back into some writing conversations, and maybe that's what some of us need is, while we're not writing, just continue to talk about it, be in community with other writers. I have word weavers friends. I don't get to go very often, but when I do go, it's always very refreshing. And people will say, "Oh, well, I haven't written anything in so long, I shouldn't even be here." No, that's why you should be here. Because um, for the time, for the time when it does come back, you'll have all of this that you can build on. So yeah, that's, I don't know. You've encouraged me today.
Good.
So we talked about the why. So we'll talk a little bit about the how. And this is where we really can brainstorm. And I've talked kind of fast this morning, so we might have to spend some time brainstorming for the rest of this because I don't have as much left to talk about. But so we're gonna mine from so the what is the past, the passion, the purpose, and the past. We're gonna mine from those. That's the what. And then the why we talked about is to keep us motivated, to keep us going, and to build authentic stories. And then let's talk a little bit about the how. Okay, how do we do that? So with the how, I want to talk about two components of that. Some of this I've already kind of said, but let's brainstorm. How do I think about what elements from my life I can use in my story? And even though I feel like I've done that, I've used these things naturally, I've never been this intentional about it. So I'm kind of curious to see how this might play out in the novel that I'm trying to finish. So I think we can ask ourselves some questions. Maybe we need to learn a little bit about ourselves in order to use these things. So we could think about this. If you only had 30 seconds to introduce yourself to a new person, what would you say? So, and I'll send you some of these later if you want them, so that we can maybe have a conversation in the Facebook chat. But yeah, I think about that. What do I want people to know about me? What am I passionate about? So that's a question you can ask yourself to kind of mine what elements can I use in a story. Okay, this is kind of a fun one. If you could only take one nonfiction book on a trip, what would the topic be?
What would the topic be, or what would the book be?
What would the topic of the nonfiction book be?
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Following after God.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Following after God. That's great.
I would probably
That's
take a study that I'm currently working on, Closer to God. It's a study on
yes.
prayer.
Yes, I have that one. That's a great one.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And then I'd also have to take My Utmost for His Highest with me. That's just my favorite
Mhm.
all-time devotional. I have a little tiny one, so it fits in my purse, and I take it with me everywhere when I travel. So,
Assuming this is after the Bible, because, Bible's always number one.
well, yes, of course.
Of course. Of course. And even, um, and I think those are definitely the most important things. But even think about your hobbies, like it's aside from spiritual, growth books. I am, what if it's, oh, if I can only read something for the next 3 weeks that I want to learn about, other than drawing closer to God, maybe it's gardening, maybe it's, you know, I want to learn more about bird watching, whatever those things are, think about your interests, and what, and how you can then, we're going to talk about how you can use those in a story. Okay. How would the person that knows you best finish the sentence? You were born to blank. So that's
Talk.
something we can talk. That's a great one. And I love that.
I talk too much. As a kid, I've shared this before. In elementary school, back in my day, we used to get a little behavior report on the back of the report card. And it was a T90, tiny little squares on the back. And the teacher managed to get 2 check marks for unnecessary talking, which was 2 bad marks. That was bad. So there you have it.
But you found a way to make that into something positive, right? So,
After I got in trouble.
yeah, not necessarily a bad thing at all. But yeah, you were born to talk. Um, so, anybody else want to chime in on what their personal one would be? When somebody said you were born to do this.
Maybe persevere would be the one for
Oh,
me. If you want to
oh, I
talk
love it.
about a need for encouragement and offering that to people, I was thinking about it as you were talking about your own inhibitions and the journey that God has you going through. Mine is one that, in my humanness, I would look at myself and be ashamed that I've spent 25 years now working on the same series.
Oh,
And God has given me a chance to be published through a small publisher and then to get my rights back to go back and revisit it as an indie publisher. But I wasn't working on that series consistently for that whole time because I was going through different phases or series of life. I was a young Bible college student for part of it, just recently married, then having kids, going into youth ministry. A lot of life happened. And there were times when the books were set aside completely. And then
mm,
brought them back. So, you
yeah.
know, um, in our humanness, we could look at that inactivity or would look at the years that just flew by and say, oh, it's a failure. You should have gone and done something else. You weren't meant to be a writer. And
Mm.
yet he kept pushing me towards that, even though there were a lot of distractions and hurdles along the way. So I would say definitely don't look at years or inactivity as necessarily a sign. That could just be a roadblock. It could be a hurdle or it could be an obstacle that God put in to teach you a lesson to get you past it so that you could
Oh,
become a better writer. Because now I can look at my books and I can see a lot of immaturity from the beginnings and I can see a lot of growth that's happened and I can see a perspective that needs to be in the books that wasn't in there before. And so he's changed me, and in shaping me, he's shaped the books. And that was one of the things that I wanted when I went to my very first writers' conference. Was I wanted my stories to grow with me as a writer, and they did. And through that perseverance, he brought about a better product, a better thing to serve my readers.
wow. I love that. That is so beautiful. And like I said, you guys have encouraged me this morning. Um, yeah, the things that we go through, um, definitely are going to change our stories. And there's no shame in, like we said, taking some time for that. Um, part of my current journey is that, and I shared this with Norma, is that our youngest is adopted, and that he's been with us. He's 9. He's been with us since he was 2.5. But there are things that come along with being an adoptive parent that are not always easy, and and I think naturally it's like it had to slow down for me. The writing had to slow down because my attention needs to be somewhere else. But what is the scripture that he's faithful to complete the good work? Somebody help me out with that one. He who started a good work and he was faithful to complete it, right? That just popped in my head. Don't know the reference. Apologize. I can look it up real quick. But that, I think we can apply. Of course, I believe he's ultimately talking about our salvation and his faithfulness in our salvation. But there's lots of things that we could apply that to that are relevant. I think that he's given you these gifts. He's given you this desire and this purpose. And we know, like, throughout scripture, and it says explicitly his timing is not our timing. So he's faithful. And if we're faithful to finish that eventually, and it will happen. It will happen. We just have to be patient, which is not my strong suit. It never has been.
Mine either. Mine either.
That's definitely. I'm doing a women's conference in a couple weeks, and ironically, it's on part of the theme is going to be the fruits of the Spirit, and I'm going to have to meditate on some things for the next couple of weeks to be able to speak on them, because patience is not the fruit that I have the most of, for sure. So, yeah, I love that conversation that, we think about what were we born to do, or how would somebody else answer that question, because their perspective might be a little bit different, and we don't see it. We don't see it the same way that people we're close to will.
Hopefully we all, as the Bible said, we were born to worship the Lord. Mm-hmm. And especially once we are saved, that should come out. Our love for him, our worship and praise of him should be seen in us. We should be that light. And hopefully, as writers and just as believers out in the community, that people, when they think of us, that's what they say is, wow, you can see Jesus in her. You can feel the presence of Christ, of the Holy Spirit, when you're with that person. And that's the goal, I think, of all of us as believers.
Yeah, absolutely. A little bit of a side note there. I always say that one of the biggest goals of my writing, and I say in my bio, is to share the redemptive love of God through story. It's very true. But Romans 8:28 is something that I really, really want for it to shine through in a story, in fiction, that all things work together for good, to them who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. And so maybe it's not here, but maybe your life verse is something that motivates you to write, that you can incorporate as a theme when you're looking for inspiration. I mean, the word of God is inspiration. So if we can continuously remind ourselves of a particular verse that is very important to us. And, like you asked me about, what do you do when you hit that wall in the middle of the story? What if when you're going back through, you look at the entire thing through the lens of that scripture, that one scripture? How does this, even if it's not explicit in your story, you can use it to shape characters. You can use it to shape events in a story. So maybe that's something that I want to shine through eventually. I've got to go back and read through it and see, am I accomplishing, am I delivering the intent of this scripture through this story like I would like to? And that's going to be different for everybody. If you've got a key verse that you can lean on when you're telling a story to help shape it, to help guide it. So kind of a sidebar there. So when we're mining our own lives for inspiration, another question that you can ask as part of the how do I do that is, what painful event in my life taught me the most? Um, if you grew from it, your characters can grow from it too. Maybe it's not even the same event, but in the way that you grew, you can use that for character development and characterization. And that might not always be comfortable to have to relive, but I think we can be intentional about using that pain. And then we talk about travel some. Like, where's the most memorable place I ever traveled? I think that's one reason I only write about North Carolina, because I've never been anywhere. So that's like, I don't have those experiences, that firsthand experiences. That's not exactly true, but I am very limited in where I have been in the world. Never left the country, and never been west of the Mississippi. So East Coast, I can tell you a little bit about, but I love my home state. And so I would think about places in North Carolina that I've been that were especially beautiful to me, or that I just really, that just make me feel a certain way when I'm there. And you can use those. So this is just some brainstorming techniques, some questions you can ask yourself. And I think if we sit down and we're making notes, we could even come up with more questions. And then you interview yourself, right? Interview yourself, figure these things out. And then the how is, how do I use them? And we've hit on some of that, but for characterization, if we make our characters share these things with us, it could be minor. It could be your love of pets. Your character has a dog, and you love your dog, and the character loves their dog, and so you're able to write that authentically. The care they have for their animals. So similar experiences and interests and purpose. But subplot, I really feel like we probably don't talk enough about subplots in writing, but you have to find subplots that are strong, that can connect to your main theme of your story, but that also stand on their own as far as holding a reader's interest. So all the things that we've talked about as far as inspiring us, our passion, our purpose, our past, what subplot can I build into an overarching theme that would prop up my story? Okay, look at it that way. So I just think, this whole conversation is really, I guess, boils down to brainstorming, interviewing yourself, and then using those notes and thinking, how can I fit it all together in the big picture of this story that I want to tell.
I have a question for you, Heather.
Sure.
With talking about subplotting,
Mm-hmm.
can you give us an example? By the way, Heather's written a fantastic book that I have just shared with so many people, and it's called Shenanigans. And if you want a lighthearted, easy read, it's Shenanigans. It's a grandmother who is a prankster. So how did you take that thought and create subplots for that story? Can you give us an
So,
example with that?
so I'll try that book. Uh, that book came out of a conversation. It started with the title. So that's kind of a fun one to talk about inspiration and brainstorming, because that entire story started with the title. So my mother is called by my children, she's called Nana. And we were in the car, and somebody made a joke about Nana and her shenanigans. And that play on words just started the wheels turning. I thought, And like most stories do, it's a what if. What if there was a grandmother who enjoyed playing jokes on people? And what if those jokes got her into trouble? And then you just run with it from there. And so it started with that. But then once I had a main idea of, okay, she lives in a retirement community, and someone accuses her of this joke that there's some possible legal ramifications, and now she's going to need a lawyer, and you know, the subplots around that. One of them was based on how does that affect her relationships with other people. You know, so she has a daughter who is displeased with her antics and doesn't quite understand where this is coming from. But part of that story, actually, a tiny bit of a spoiler, is that her daughter was adopted. So I was able to weave that passion of mine into the story to showcase, to highlight something that's close to my heart. So, which is foster care and adoption. In this story, her she was actually her granddaughter, but she had raised her as her daughter. She had adopted her after her son had been killed, and so that subplot of being able to use adoption in that story, then like I said, I'm able to highlight it, but then I'm also able to build around that. How does that change their dynamic? How does that change the relationship that they have? And you kind of develop that out. The other thing was the setting. So the setting, I mentioned earlier that of all the books that I've written, only 2 were set in real places. So I have Songs for Sunday was set in Winston-Salem, but Shenanigans is set in Southport, North Carolina, which you and I both enjoy.
Yep.
And I was able to use those real places, and that's getting into more characterization than subplot. But that was a fun thing to use from my real life in that story.
Thank you. That is a great book, and like I said, if you want a fun, easy read, that's your book. It's you'll laugh a lot, I promise.
Well, thank you for touting that book. That was the only novel that I self-published, and it was a fun process. When I started out writing, there are commonalities in genre, but I did not really have my genre nailed down as much as I hope I do now. So now I would say just Southern fiction. Some of it's been contemporary, some of it's been historical, but I kind of land on now under the umbrella of Southern fiction and try to stay closer to some of the more traditional elements of that genre. Early on, it was kind of a hodgepodge of things, and Shenanigans was something that was definitely unique. It was it's just its own thing, you know. But I don't write romance as such. There are elements of romance. That one was the closest to romance that I have ever written, and the romance was between 2 80-year-olds, so a little bit unique. Maybe not, it was a little bit outside of market, but it was fun.
Very different from Grace and Lavender, or Lavender and Grace and Lavender.
Grace and Lavender, yeah. Grace and
a little
Lavender.
different.
And my second novel, called Where I Was Planted, is the only story I've told in first person. So again, it's very different. The main character is a 10-year-old boy, so very outside of market. Now I'm kind of finding my groove and landing in more of a traditional Southern fiction with a lean toward women's fiction, but with the last 2 books. Then again, my 5th novel was Split Time. It's my only time novel. So dual timelines. So that was another kind of deviation from a standard. But the last one was contemporary, and it was more general fiction, Southern fiction, with a lean toward women's fiction. So overall, when we're talking about this this idea of mining inspiration, I just kind of want to, we've got some time to continue talking, but as far as what I have prepared, just kind of leave you with this main idea. And when I was thinking about how we use our life, bring your life into your fiction and bring your fiction to life. And that's just something that I thought about, that I do feel like we, sometimes you sit down and the words just flow. right? Sometimes the ideas are just there and they pour out and it's amazing. And then sometimes it requires a little bit more thought and intention. And so if you're in a place where I'm maybe it's you need to build a story and you feel like it's lacking in in substance, maybe these are some ideas that you can use to kind of get those wheels turning. Look at your own life, your passion, your purpose, and your past, and then and look at the structure that you have and say, where can I fit this in? Where could I place these elements in a subplot in my character that might help it to be a stronger read, stronger story overall. And so I'm going to try this with the novel that I've been working on, and we'll see what happens.
Great. Well, I'd like to invite everybody to come back on if you have some questions for Heather or comments about some of the things that she shared with us. Feel free to come back on. And if you did end up in writer's jail, which I don't know if Melissa put anybody in there, but if you can't get out, let us know. But yeah, come on back on camera. Don't be shy. And
I would love to know if anybody else has some of these brainstorming questions that maybe somebody else thought of some more that when you're interviewing yourself, you might ask. Yeah, I'm sure there are lots of them.
What's your favorite ice cream?
Yeah, we talk about interviewing our characters, right? That's a lot of writing advice is interview your characters, really get to know your characters. And again, you don't want to make them a carbon copy of yourself. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. But what fun elements can I take from my own life, give my character so that I have more, I can write authentic details, and also it helps keep it fun. You want to, it's motivating. Like I want to share this with the world. And this is part, there's part of me in this. And I think it's motivating, to finish your story.
Any other thoughts from anyone else? Got a silent group today.
I think a lot of these techniques can apply to nonfiction as well.
Oh, that's a great point. I like that.
Yep.
I was telling somebody the other day that for nonfiction, having fiction elements is really important in most nonfiction. I mean, you have to be a storyteller to throw in things that in a nonfiction book as well. Not that I've written a lot of nonfiction. I've written devotions, and part of that storytelling as well. But yeah, that's a great point that you can, interview yourself to see where your passions are, to see what what's your purpose. Examine yourself so that even your nonfiction can be stronger and more authentic.
Leslie asks, how do you share your life without making it seem like a memoir? I tried to balance it, but I'm not sure if I'm doing it well.
Oh, that's a great point. I think if we're doing it like this intentionally, it's there is some brainstorming, write it out, and then just pick which elements to include and which ones to leave on the table. Because certainly, you're not writing an autobiography. Give your characters enough of their own things, and maybe that's just the balance. You look and see how much of the story resembles my life versus how much of it is very, very different. Maybe just look at that dynamic. You need, like I said, I thankfully have not lived a life that's interesting enough to be, some people have, but a story has to have conflict. You have to have a lot of conflict to build an interesting story. And I'm thankful that, I don't have quite as much drama as I want my characters to have. So I can take the everyday things, the fun things. I use my kids in my writing a lot. Okay. That's fun for me to be able to take some one-liners that my kids have said, throw them in a book, and then when I'm writing the story, it's like, I really want to get this out there because this is a fun memory for me of like my kid said this funny thing, and this will, as long as it's in print, you know, this lasts forever. So I can take those little elements from my life and put them in. But overall, my characters are going to have very different experiences and very different lives, and because they've got drama that I don't want, so they need drama that I don't have in order to make it a compelling story. Because we need conflict.
Where do you get your ideas for some of the drama if you haven't experienced it? From other people that you've heard their stories, or where do those ideas come from? We know it all comes from the Lord, but
Yeah,
where,
most stories that I have written of the six novels, most stories start with a character. So my books are very character driven. So I think about a person, and then they come from that question that I said earlier. It's usually a what if. You ask yourself, you have a character in mind. It needs to be a character that you really love. Because I think that's part of the problem that I'm having in the story that I'm writing, is that I look back and I don't like my character enough. I don't like her enough to finish telling her story. So you have to really like your character. And then you ask these what if questions. Well, what if this person in this situation had this happen to them? And then when that happened, what if they handled it this way? And you can kind of build that out. But it usually, like, the inspiration for me for the main story has so far always been just something that hit me really hard out of nowhere. my first novel, the novella Grace and Lavender, the way I started writing was that this character started talking to me. I was sitting on the beach, and I've told this story several places and times, and it's on my website. I was sitting on the beach, and this person popped into my head and started telling me her story, and I thought I was having a nervous breakdown because it was so strong, and I was like, what is this? And I took out my phone, and then I started making notes about this idea of what this 60-year-old woman was telling me. She didn't have an age, didn't have a name, but she was an older person who was seeking her purpose in life. And as I just sat there on the beach, thinking about, and maybe that's another talk for inspiration, is, go sit on a beach somewhere and relax and clear your mind, and maybe God will give you these things. But that was how it all started for me, was this character that I felt like I had to tell her story.
wow, Patricia, that's crazy. Patricia just put in the comments that machine guns pointed at my husband and I at Haiti airport while the consulate helped us get on a plane with our adopted second daughter.
Ooh,
Can't get
wow.
more crazy than that. I agree. I agree. That
Okay,
should make
definitely something that you can use in a story in some way, shape, or form. So that's that's amazing.
absolutely.
Yeah. So even if you don't use the exact experience, you can use the emotion of that. So there's fear there, and then say, okay, how can I take what I've experienced and felt and allow my character to feel the same way, so that I can really make this feel so real to my reader, because you've lived that experience. That's definitely something you can use.
I think too, it's a good idea to keep the purpose of your story in mind as well as the intent. There's a lot of people, we see a transition away from it, I think, which is a good thing. That in the past, a lot of people would write stories just to rant, just to push an
Mm,
agenda or something along those lines. And so they would use those characters as like their physical dummy to beat up in front of everybody else and say, this is what I hate about XYZ. And
yeah.
that there's a real temptation to that, for people to take real life experiences or people they know and imbue them in a character. And that's one of the things that I purposely and intentionally try not to do. I have made it a purpose in my writing that every fictional character is not based on one single person. There may be
Mm.
some attributes of some people that I'll put into them, but always for the purpose of showing something better to direct people towards truth or to something good rather than hopping on a soapbox about something.
Oh, yeah. That's a great point. I love that. Very
So
important.
yeah, I think we should definitely be mindful as writers. What is the intent behind your writing and your character, and is that intent something that should be written about? So yeah,
And I think
good.
that covers both fiction and nonfiction
Hmm.
because I've seen one time I saw in fiction where it or non a nonfiction article where instead of giving you the problem and then showing you the solution that God presented, it was like you said, Melissa, it was just like this rant about whatever. And I think I only got about halfway, maybe through the article, and I could skim down to the bottom, and there was not really much of a solution, maybe in the last two sentences. And so yeah, whether fiction or nonfiction, we need to be careful of that. That's a good point. Good point, Melissa. Well, we are at almost at the top of the hour. Any other comments before we close out for today? Heather, this has been fantastic, and so many of the comments in the chat have been, "This is great. It's been encouraging. Thank you for coming and being our guest." Any one more shout out? Any other comments or questions for Heather? All right, Melissa, do you know it's on tap for next week?
I do indeed, and I think we'll have a lot of people very excited about it. Next week, we're going to have Johnny Alexander come back on to talk about voice versus tone and to discover the
Mm.
difference. Just give you a little highlight on that. She sent me some information. She's looking forward to coming back and chatting with all of us again. For those who may not be aware, she's one of our former co-hosts. So she's going to share with us in a session that will explore the differences between narrative and authorial voice, why some writers have a strong, recognizable voice, while others adapt to the needs of each story, and the elements that shape both voice and tone. And most importantly, we'll examine how voice and tone work across genres through practical examples. So this is going to be a good one for those who have really struggled with finding their author voice and differentiating that between the tone of the story. So
And we've been
join
trying
us
to get
next
her
week.
to come on and do this for a long time, even when she was still with us co-hosting. So
So she's finally doing it, folks.
yes, yes, she finally has room in her schedule. So we're glad to have her back. Yeah.
Yes. And for those that don't know, both Bethany and Johnny and another lady who also used to be a co-host, Jeannie, they started Writers Chat
Over
almost
10 years ago. Yep.
10, 11 years ago. And, God has just blessed this ministry. And that's how we look at Writers Chat, as a ministry to encourage writers to go forth in the calling that God has placed on them. So, Brandy, you want to close this out?
Well, I think y'all pretty much did a good job with that. For everybody who's here, please stick around for the after party. If you can, Heather, we'd love to have you stay with us for a little bit. We just stay on for 10, 15 minutes or so. And we chat all things, which is why you should come and join us live. Writers Chat members on Facebook. It's a group. That's how you do it. You get the event notices ahead of time and you can come be here. So if you've watched a replay, thank you so much. We appreciate you. And I hope you have a good rest of your week. Keep writing.